DNS Recon or DNS Reconnaissance. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how to perform DNS Reconnaissance. So again, remember this falls under passive information gathering, which means we're not really going to be actively engaging with the DNS server. So, we're not going to be performing anything like DNS zone transfer. We're simply trying to identify the records associated with a particular domain. So, we're trying to identify records, maybe the mail server, IP address, TXT records, anything that could provide us with a better understanding as to how the target website or a target system is configured to run. And in this case, we're primarily going to be focusing on websites because that's really where DNS comes into play. So again, I'm going to be running this or performing this practical demonstration on my Kali Linux VM. And the reason for that, as I said previously, is because we're essentially utilizing the internet. So I'm just going to switch over to my Kali Linux VM and we can get started. Back on my Kali Linux VM, and the first tool that we're going to be taking a look at is a tool called DNS Recon. All right, so if I just perform a quick Google search for DNS Recon, this will bring up the tool here. I'm just going to accept here because Google thinks that I'm a robot for some weird reason, but there we are. The Google search is complete. So as you can see, DNS Recon is a Python script that provides you the ability to perform or check all name server records for zone transfers, enumerate general DNS records, which is what we're looking for here for a particular domain name. So we're looking for the actual mail server address, the actual name server, addresses, which is IPv4 addresses, IPv6 addresses, and of course the TXT records here. So DNS Recon comes pre-packaged with Kali Linux, so we don't need to install it. To use it, we can simply type in DNS Recon, and I can open up the help menu here. Although we're really not going to be performing we're not going to be taking a look at how to utilize it extensively because, there are other resources like DNS Dumpster, which I'll get to in a second. But it's fairly easy to understand. We simply need to say DNS Recon and then specify the domain name, which in this case, we're going to be using hackersploit.org. There we are. And it's going to take a few seconds, and once it's done, it's going to output a lot of information. Now in this case, this may look a little bit confusing, but let me explain what's happening here. So when we're performing passive DNS reconnaissance, we're essentially trying to look for the name server addresses. So in this case, we know it's Cloudflare, so it provides us with the name server, the primary name server used by a site. As I said, in this case, it's Cloudflare, and then any other records like the record, which is the IPv4 address of the website, which in this case, because it's going through Cloudflare, is not the accurate one. We then have the AAAA records, which is referring to IPv6 addresses. And then, of course, the other important piece of information is the actual mail server address denoted by the MX record here, which points to the following IP. So that's very important because if you perform your research, you know that Cloudflare really doesn't hide or proxy mail server addresses really well. So, am I secretly revealing something to you? But if we perform this on a site like zonetransfer.me, which I'll just do right now, let me just clear my terminal. So I'll say DNS Recon and D, and I can then say zonetransfer.me. You'll be able to see what I'm talking about. So you can see that firstly, DNSSEC is not configured. It'll tell us the actual name server, which in this case, it provides the domain and then the mapped IP address. And then of course, we have the various MX records. Now in this case, it looks like it failed, but that's not really a problem in this case. So we have various MX records that point to in certain cases, different addresses. But from this, you can pretty much tell what email service or email server is being used, by this particular company or organization. In this case, it looks like it's they are using Google Mail or G Suite, if you will, because we can see quite a few Google Mail MX records here. And then of course we get the IP address of the actual site, which is, the A record here. And then of course we get a TXT record, which, essentially used for diagnostic information. In this case, it's a Google site verification TXT record that is typically used whenever you want to track a website's analytics with Google. They'll typically tell you to add a DNS record, a TXT DNS record, and add the following information. So, in this case, it's the domain name itself, and then this is the actual value contained within the actual TXT record. So that's how to use DNS Recon. Now, a tool that I really recommend that you use, and one that I personally use for pen tests, is a site called DNS Dumpster, which essentially performs DNS reconnaissance research, and it essentially finds and performs a lookup on DNS records, very similar to what DNS Recon does, but the way it sorts and organizes information is absolutely fantastic. So, as it says here, DNSdumpster.com is a free domain research tool that can discover hosts related to a domain. Finding visible hosts from the attacker's perspective is an important part of the security assessment process. Indeed, it is. So I'll just enter my site here. So hackersploit.org. We'll give this a couple of seconds. And there we are. So firstly, it's going to show you the IP block owners. In this case, they all belong to Cloudflare. So it'll provide us with the DNS servers used by this website, which in this case are the following. So you have d.ns.cloudflare.com and jim.ns.cloudflare.com and the respective IP addresses. It then provides you with the organization name that owns that particular IP and the location. And if we click on this here, you can see you can get the HTTP headers from this particular IP address. You can attempt a zone transfer, which we'll not do right now. You can also trace a path to an IP address using MTR. You can also find hosts sharing this DNS server. So for example, if we identified this particular DNS server, we could also try and see, okay, what other websites or what other hosts are using this DNS server? And we can also search the banners for NetBlock, which is passive. And that's one of the great things about DNS Dumpster is it'll actually classify the checks you're performing based on whether or not they're passive or active. So in this case, we can perform the actual find hosts sharing this DNS server. And this will give you a list. In this case, it tells us no DNS server records found. That's perfectly fine. We'll get back to that in a second. But then we have the MX record, which points to the mail server. And in this case, Premium 58 web hosting. Okay. That's owned by Namecheap. Okay. And we can then, again, if we click on this, is because this is a MX record, or this is essentially pointing to any mail server that has been configured for this domain. The additional checks we can perform are an Nmap port scan, but that's active. And by the way, this is being done on the website itself. But yeah, we essentially get the TXT records, which you can see this site has been, verified by Google. And there are a couple of other TXT records. And then, of course, we get additional A records. And in this case, we've been able to identify a subdomain. In this case, it's pointing to forum.hackersploit.org. So we can open that up. And indeed, we can see that Hackersploit does have a forum. Interesting. Okay, so you can see how useful this is. We've already been able to identify subdomains just by, just by performing DNS reconnaissance. And of course, this is passive. And of course, we have the actual A record for the hackersploit.org domain here. We can also perform a trace path, and in this case, a valid key is required. So, we'll not get to that, but you can download an Excel spreadsheet of all the hosts, or you can view the graph that essentially gives you a graphical view of the DNS reconnaissance we have performed. So the reason why I like this is because you can actually see that we have the following domains within Cloudflare, right? So these are being protected by Cloudflare. So this is the domain itself. We then have the A records themselves, which are being protected by Cloudflare. We have the respective domains and the IP addresses. And then we have the name servers. So we have jim.ns and d.ns.cloudflare.com. the mail server is not being protected by Cloudflare, which is very, very important, which is why I wanted to showcase this tool. The other cool thing is you can actually export this as a PNG or download it as an Excel spreadsheet, which is, absolutely fantastic. So if I download this as a PNG, I'm just going to save this here. It should be downloaded shortly. Let's see whether this is done. It's probably still downloading. All right, so that is downloaded under my downloads directory as export.png, and you can see we pretty much have the same image where you actually selected or cropped to. So I really like that. And of course, you can see it actually maps the domain for you. So you can actually click on this to get the full size image. But the really cool thing about this is it maps it in a way that you can understand. So we have the domain hackersploit.org. All right, for DNS, we have the two name servers, right? You can see them right over here. So we have D and Jim, and they point to their own addresses. These all belong to Cloudflare. We then have the MX record, which is the mail server. It then tells us the IP address of the mail server. We then have an A record for the forum, which is a subdomain, and that points to the following address here. And that, of course, is protected by Cloudflare. And of course, we have the main domain, or the main A record, which is hackersploit.org, and that points to the following IP, which is again, protected by Cloudflare. Really cool stuff. So that is DNS Dumpster in a nutshell. Now we can also run this on another website. So I'll just run this on zonetransfer.me because this will reveal, a little bit more information. So I'll just click on search there, and hopefully there we are. So it's going to perform the DNS lookup now. So you can see we have the DNS servers here. They point to these specific IPs. And in this case, you can see one of the host names points to AWS. So that means that one of these name servers is being hosted, or one of these DNS servers is being hosted on AWS. Very interesting. We then have MX records. These are the mail server records here that point to Google, really. So that means that they're using Gmail or G Suite. And then we have a TXT record and, the A records here. We can view the graph here to get a better understanding of the, the target infrastructure. So you can see we have the zonetransfer.me website. We then have the name server that's, not being protected by any proxy or any firewall. And that's one of them has the IP here, and that is nsztm2.digi.ninja. That is running on AWS. And then we have the primary one here because it has the one there with the IP address there. And it also looks like we have OVH here. So that's an A record. That's zonetransfer.me. And then we have all of these MX records that all fall under Google. So you can see that these are all the MX records. So I really like this graph because it gives you a very good hierarchical view of the organization and how everything interpolates with each other from a DNS perspective. And of course, it provides you with the actual domain mapping here, which you can explore yourself, So really, really cool stuff. So that is how to perform passive DNS reconnaissance. And that is going to conclude the practical demonstration side of this video. All right, in the next video, we're going to be taking a look at how to detect firewalls or how to identify whether a website is being protected by a proxy or firewall. So I'll be seeing you in the next video.